Welcome to The Point. I'm Anna Kasparian, host of The Point and also co-host of the Young Turks. We have an excellent show ahead for you guys today and excellent panelists as usual. I don't know if you guys heard, but Black Friday just happened and our consumerism is having an impact worldwide. And some people are comparing our consumerism to the factory fire that happened in Bangladesh. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Also, turns out Republicans are being portrayed as reasonable when it comes to taxation here in the United States. Is the media being deceptive? We'll delve into that. And finally, domestic violence in the United States and Chris Brown going after a female comedian on Twitter. What are the twits tweeting? We'll talk about that a little more as well. But first, let's meet our panelists. Robert Greene is a longtime movie producer who recently helped launch HuffPost Live. He is also one of the founders of Another Green World, an independent production company responsible for a range of content for movies, TV, and the web. Robert, you also produce some of the more memorable viral videos for the Obama campaign featuring celebrities like Samuel Jackson and Sarah Silverman. So has the president called you to thank you yet?
He's not. Actually, it was for a super PAC, so it was not officially for the Obama campaign. And I had all these experiences where I had to send an email to a different email address because this was for a super PAC, and if you send it to the official email address of that person, then they weren't allowed to talk to you because those election laws are insane. Would be why.
Also, fans of TYT will probably recognize the Lorax, also known as Lucas Lilieholm. He is the producer for the Young Turks on Current TV. He essentially operates as the brains behind Cenk Uyghur's Brawn. I don't know if brawn is the word I would have used there, Malcolm. Well, he's also the foremost environmentalist on the staff here at TYT. Lucas, thanks for joining us today. And I hear that you just shaved your mustache. It's No Shave November.
A few people on the staff are a little disappointed about that. Yeah.
Well, I
bailed early.
I'm glad you don't look like a 70s porn star anymore. And finally, last but not least, Alexis Garcia is a political producer and correspondent for PJTV.com and a contributor to Fox News Latino. She also worked as a communications aide for Giuliani and Palin in 2008. Thanks for coming on, and I have to commend you for returning to the belly of the beast. You've done it a couple times, and I think it takes a courageous person to do that.
Well, this show's a lot of fun, and don't worry, I shaved my mustache too for today.
Oh, whoa.
I'm not the only one.
All right, well, let's get right to it. Our first segment has to do with a factory fire in Bangladesh, and it's really making some companies, or supposedly making some companies, really rethink some of their strategy when it comes to outsourcing jobs. Let's take a look at a video sent to us by Judy Gearhart, the executive director of the International Labor Rights Forum.
Hi, I'm Judy Gearhart. I'm the Executive Director of the International Labor Rights Forum. And my point is global apparel brands need to start taking responsibility for the deadly sweatshop factory fires that have killed hundreds of workers in the apparel industry. In the past 7 years, more than 700 workers have died in building collapses and factory fires in Bangladesh, where we've been tracking this data. What kind of businesses ignore that kind of a trend? It's time for a change. It's time to rethink the apparel industry. Workers who've survived these fires report finding exits blocked with product in their way, insufficient fire escapes, and panic overall that makes it really difficult for them to exit. Oftentimes workers jumping from windows in order to get out because they can't get out on the bottom floors. Since the 1990s, global brands have been using confidential, voluntary codes of conduct that have tended to sideline the role of workers and their organizations in the implementation of change inside these factories. It's clearly not working. ILRF is working with a coalition of organizations, trade unions, and NGOs to promote a contract, a building and fire safety contract. We're calling on all apparel brands, especially the biggest, Gap, H&M, and Walmart, to sign on to this contract. It's an agreement that ensures sufficient financing for change in the factories. It ensures independent inspections, public reporting, a central role for workers and their organizations in the solution, and a binding commitment to change. For more information on how you can help us pressure global apparel brands to change their industry and protect the safety of workers that make our clothing, please visit our website, laborrights.org. Thank you.
Now, to give you guys a little background information on the fire in Bangladesh, about 112 workers in a factory died after a fire broke out. Unfortunately, the factory did not follow any fire safety precautions, so they were trapped in the building. And many people in Bangladesh have been protesting because or the lack of workers' rights when it comes to these factories. And if you guys paid close attention to that video, behind Gearhart there was a poster that made reference to the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire of 1911, and that was the fire that really started workers' rights in the industrial era here in the United States. And all of a sudden you have regulations that protect workers, and these are the types of regulations that we should be pushing for in other countries as well, because no one should be dying in a factory fire because they've locked the doors to prevent theft. Now, Robert, first question goes to you. You know, after this story broke out about the fire in Bangladesh, you hear companies like Walmart saying, oh, we didn't know that they were one of our suppliers, and they're kind of, you know, pretending as if they really care about workers' rights. This is something that they're really concerned about. What are your thoughts about that? Do our companies care, and do Americans care?
I think it's clear in the case of Walmart, who actually hire companies that specifically vet these factories for them, that no, they don't care. What they do care about is making sure that they give the absolute best price that they can to the American consumer, so that the American consumer shops at Walmart and not somewhere else. And that is partially Walmart's fault, and when you have $120 billion worth of wealth in that family combined between all the different sons and daughters, you know that it's worked for them. They've made a lot of money behaving that way, but they've got that money from somewhere, and where they've got it from is the American consumer going and shopping at Walmart. I think at a certain point we have to decide whether or not people are culpable, in the sense that buying a $5 t-shirt, did it get to be $5 magically, or was there some process that made it a $5 t-shirt? And why is this one $5 and that one $20? At the moment, I think there hasn't been enough work done to say to consumers, you can have that $5 t-shirt, but although it's white, it's actually red with the blood of the people who made it for you to make it $5.
Now, Lucas, you know, Robert brought up a lot of really great points, but does it kind of come full circle when you consider some of the wages that Americans are being paid? I mean, when they look at a shirt that's worth $5 and then the shirt that's worth $20, wouldn't you argue that most Americans are going to go for that $5 shirt without really thinking about the consequences because of the fact that wages have been stagnant for the middle class in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think that this is sort of part of a larger trend here that over the last 30 years or so, basically, as you said, workers' wages in the United States have remained pretty stagnant. And the way that we've counteracted that is by trying to drive down the cost of goods. So basically that creates a necessity to send manufacturing to third world countries where we can pay people less and there's less regulation. But it's an extension of the fact that American consumers and American workers haven't shared in the increasing prosperity of the United States over the last few decades. So I think that's more the story here, and in a certain sense, well, I agree that I don't think Walmart really cares that much about the workers in third world countries and all. I also think that given the competitiveness of the marketplace and all, we don't have any ability for morality to be built in. So that's where regulation comes into place, that you have to have these kinds of laws, because companies can't really voluntarily do it, because if they don't, you know, if Walmart does it and Target doesn't, well then Target's going to get the business and Walmart won't. So ultimately, I think that's where you got to have kind of a little bit more of a guiding hand in there, both on the side of workers and then also on the side of consumers as well. So
we've talked about the American people, we've talked about companies in the United States. What about our politicians in the U.S.? Do you think our politicians are being disingenuous when they're saying that they care about what's happening abroad? I mean, they're really giving companies an incentive to move their, labor abroad.
I mean, their constituents are here, but Rob's going to die. But I agree with his point that I think companies care when they get caught. But I do think that you see some companies that see social responsibility as good business practice. We had a great article in the New York Times about Costco and how they actually pay their workers decent wages and give them benefits. And it's not just, hey, look, we're taking care of our workers, but it also makes sense because you have, less theft, you have less absenteeism. It's good for your brand. And when you're a company, your reputation is, I think, more important than anything. Mm-hmm. I think of, we see some of these practices, these horrible practices that go on, and you know, you have to think, yeah, in the short term you get profit, but I don't think long term it's good for a company. And I think, you know, if we're gonna, you know, try to expand and, you know, be that presence in the world where we have these principles, yeah, I think we need to have some regulations, because free market isn't always moral.
So you sound like one of the more reasonable conservatives. I don't know if you want to consider yourself a conservative,
I think education awareness is important, and you see that happen in the food industry, where I think people are a little bit more aware of what they eat. And you know, I saw a great story over Thanksgiving of people actually wanting more grass-fed beef, which I think is a big change. But yeah, I think it is a cultural thing, and it is an education thing. But I think you see companies that really value social responsibility. I think of the great libertarian John Allison. He was the CEO of BB&T Bank. He refused to do subprime mortgages. Everyone called him crazy, and he ended up being right in the long run. But I think it makes good business sense. And yeah, capitalism is good. It lifts people up and gives them opportunity. But when we're going into countries that, you know, it's a free-for-all, I think we do need to be a little bit more aware of what these practices are doing.
Right, and we also have these free trade agreements that get rid of taxes and tariffs and allows our companies to ship jobs overseas because they get the cheap labor. And, you know, as we mentioned already, once they get caught with some of the more egregious business practices and labor practices, all of a sudden they're like, oh, we didn't know about that. Yeah. Apple and Foxconn is another example of that, right?
Sure, and I think this is example number 1 million of the hippies are always right. You know, when Clinton was pushing for NAFTA and a lot of these free trade agreements, you had people on the left saying, and the labor unions in the US saying, okay, we're for these agreements as long as there are side agreements that say that there's going to be some sort of an international minimum wage, or there's going to be protections built in for workers. And Clinton said, yeah, we'll do that, we'll do that. And then, of course, they only passed one half of it, which was the free trade part, and none of that stuff got passed, none of the codicils. So because of that, you end up with this. You end up with exactly these problems. It was predicted, it happened. There's been a race to the bottom where, you know, the lowest possible wage in the world is the right wage, right? If you're at Walmart and you say, I have a fiduciary responsibility that every quarter I have to have the best possible profit. Therefore, if somebody in Haiti will do this for 5 cents, I need to hire that person, and not the person in Bangladesh who's now 25 cents because we cleared a path for them to be able to escape when there's a fire. Obviously, as Alexis said, that's not moral. And it's not about being moral, because capitalism doesn't have to be moral. It has to be about that sense of getting the most money that you can possibly get in. Until that changes, we're going to have to come up with regulations. We're going to have to improve them. But we're also going to have to educate people. You have to tell the consumer what they're doing. They have to be aware of what we have all the tools. We have the ability to report about what Haiti looks like or what Bangladesh looks like, and it should be on our TV. And we should see those kids, the children who are getting paid nothing. We should see the house they live in, and then we should look at our t-shirt again and think about whether or not it was the right purchase for us to make.
Education is definitely power, especially when it comes to topics like this. But, you know, my mind wanders back to a segment that Fox News did when it came to the fire in Bangladesh, and they had a guest on that said, hey, free market, baby. Right? That was paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. Lucas, what do you have to say about people who make the argument that the regulations here in the United States is the reason why companies are taking jobs overseas? It's the regulations that we need to get rid of. I mean, do you see the United States going toward a downward spiral as you see in countries like China or Bangladesh?
Well, I think, yeah, I think they're right in the sense that the regulations are the reason that jobs are leaving the United States, but you know, the point as far as this being a race to the bottom, I think is a very good point. That certainly, but does that mean you want to eliminate all regulation? Because those regulations mean a minimum wage and mean, you know, adequate living standards. So if we're willing to get rid of those, then sure, we can compete with China. But do we want to do that? Is that what we want as a society? And I think probably we don't. And as far as, you know, in Walmart, I would love to see more of the products that are sold there be manufactured here, and I think in general probably a lot of people that are looking for work that can't find jobs would like that as well. So I think again we have to take into context or into our perspective what we want our society to look like, and then you structure regulation to kind of hope to achieve that to some degree. And that may mean putting tariffs on products that are manufactured for super cheap, because yes, it is super cheap, but there is a cost ultimately to eroding middle-class wages. You know, there's external costs all around. And then I think also there's an environmental dimension to this too, which is that excessive amounts of really cheap stuff it's cheap in a certain sense, but it's also using an enormous amount of resources, and it's feeding a culture where we buy things today and throw them away tomorrow. And you know, there was an article out yesterday on how basically 2011 was the highest level of CO2 emissions in you know, post-industrial history.
Bringing it back to the environment.
Yeah, well, it's true, but in some ways, you know, we're not fully out of the recession, or technically we're out of the recession, but there's still a lot of people unemployed. But the problem that I see as a much larger problem here is that the method that we want to use to get back to full employment, to get back to a strong economy, is destroying the planet. Mm-hmm. So basically right now we kind of need to fundamentally restructure what we consider to be a good economy, and it can't be based on excessive consumer demand.
Right.
And I think that's that's one of the much kind of larger challenges that never gets talked about in all of this debate of, you know, Keynesian stimulus, whatever it is.
Right.
There's a much larger dimension that all of that thinking is predicated on a world of unlimited resources, unlimited growth, and we're kind of bumping up against a ceiling there, and we really need to start talking about that as a much bigger issue.
Yeah, well, you're fighting a losing battle, unfortunately. I mean, Black Friday wasn't enough. We had to have Grey Thursday in addition to that.
Cyber Monday.
And Cyber Monday, right.
But also, just to speak to the Foxconn Apple thing, because I think it's really interesting, and I think it's really stark, because everybody loves their Apple products, and Apple is sitting on about 60 or 70 billion dollars in cash overseas that they're just parked. They're not doing anything with it. Meanwhile, Foxconn is paying workers jack shit. Mm-hmm. And people are committing suicide, and it's a miserable place to work for most people who work at Foxconn. And if Apple said to itself, you know, it would be great PR for us to take 30 billion of that 70 billion and dump it towards making sure that Foxconn can pay its workers properly. We'll still have plenty of money in the bank. We'll be doing plenty of R&D and all the stuff we're supposed to do. It's not like they're doing anything with the money, so there's not a fiduciary responsibility with it, and yet they don't feel compelled to do so. And to me, that makes them immoral. It also, I think, makes them unpatriotic. I think that Apple as a company, by behaving that way, is really as bad as Walmart, if not worse than Walmart. Because what is the excuse? How could you possibly justify saying, I want this person to make your iPad, which to Lucas's point is part of a planned obsolescence anyway. They want to make sure you buy the new iPad next year too, so they don't even make it well. But I want to make sure that the person who is making that is getting paid the least amount possible so that we can sit on a ton of cash that we don't pay taxes on in the US. Because essentially, as far as I can tell, they don't give a shit.
You know, I love that you mentioned that it's unpatriotic. During a recent debate I did with a libertarian by the name of Austin Peterson and a conservative named J.P. Freer, you know, I brought up this whole notion about how, you know, you need regulations, companies are amoral, and, you know, you look at Foxconn. Foxconn is a perfect example where lack of regulation leads to suicides and people are miserable there. And the one argument that you get from these free market thinkers is, well, it's better than child prostitution. And they compare,
pretty low bar.
That's a pretty low bar. So, you know, whenever Foxconn comes up, I immediately think about that. But Lucas and also Alexis, I want to ask you guys, what are the real solutions? Because is boycotting a company or a specific product the right way to go when it comes to raising awareness about, you know, some of the labor practices abroad?
Well, again, you know, I think regulation here, a perfect example, and this doesn't really so much tackle issues abroad, but is like raise the minimum wage here. Mm-hmm. You know, and I wanted to make the point too that in my mind, you know, the example about Apple or Walmart, you look at these companies that are incredibly profitable and right now are just sitting on a lot of cash. They don't have anywhere really to invest it that's going to be a high return. And to me, that's a total indictment of trickle-down economics, because basically the idea was supposed to be that if the folks at the top are doing well, either corporate or individual, that wealth is going to kind of raise all boats. And basically all it's done is accumulate at the top, and it's kind of pulled out of the center. And now there's no demand in the center, in the middle class there. And so basically this cash, there's just oceans of cash sitting out there. It's like $3 trillion that corporate America is sitting on. That, by that theory, is supposed to, you know, spur the economy, create jobs for people, but if there's no demand for any of those products, it's not going to happen. So, you know, I think it's just a kind of an indictment of that whole idea, and it's, you know, it's just bad economics too. Mm-hmm.
Well, I do consider myself a free market thinker, and you know, yeah, we can say all we want about Apple, but I mean, look around. Everyone here has Apple computers. I own Apple products. you know, it makes it really hard as a consumer when, you know, I don't see really another option. But, you know, to me, yeah, regulation when it's for public health and public safety is great, but I feel like in this country, I think sometimes we've overreached too much with regulation and we made it really hard to start a business. I mean, you look at Kenya and Africa, they have done really good things about lowering the barriers to entering the market, and you've seen their economy flourish. You know, you have in Nevada, hair braiders have to have more training hours than EMTs. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I do think there is a balance of regulation that you can have, so you don't make it hard for people to start a business. But yeah, I do think, you know, as a consumer, it is hard to kind of balance, you know, yeah, I make my choice to shop at Costco and Whole Foods, and I can do that, but, you know, I have Apple products, and I don't consider. You know, I don't consider myself unpatriotic, but I do think it opens this interesting question of, you know, this is where the policymakers come in, and, you know, putting pressure on places like China, and that have repeatedly ignored human rights, and it's hard to not feel helpless sometimes about that.
And, you know, don't take this the wrong way. I'm actually genuinely curious. You know, in this age of deregulation, what kind of regulations can you point to that really hinder the creation or job creation here in the United States, or the creation of companies in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Chicago and did a piece on a small business cafe there, and I mean, the amount of permits that you need to get to open a business, overlapping permits. I mean, look at the food truck industry here in Southern California. You know, there's some genuine things about health there, but a lot of it too is some of these brick and mortar businesses scared about competition and trying to have some of these regulations about, you know, these trucks can only be a certain number of feet away from the curb, or they need to be in this area, which, you know, it seem a little bit ridiculous. So I think things like that, regulations that are outdated, that we haven't really taken a look at, I think that can be a big hindrance.
Yeah. You have to have international laws. The only way to solve this problem is to, for instance, an idea that's been mooted for a long time is to have an international minimum wage pegged to GDP of the individual country that you're doing business with. And it would be simple to do, and it would mean that somebody in Haiti obviously would make a lot less money than somebody here because of their GDP, but as their GDP started to grow, as the country started to grow, as there was success, like you've seen in Kenya or other places, you would have that reflected down through society. Because many of these third world countries where we do business, unfortunately, don't allow for the sort of spread of capital. The capital accumulates with a very small number of people, and they move to LA and hang out with us. And it doesn't really do anybody any good.
All right, Robert. I'm going to have to let Robert have the last word on that. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, is Grover Norquist getting punched in the face by the Republican Party? We'll tell you what the reality is when we come back. Welcome back to The Point. Anna Kasparian with you, and I just want to remind you guys, please go ahead and leave some comments below this video. We love hearing your feedback. Our executive producer and Malcolm Fleschner love to read what you guys have to say, especially when you're trolling us. It's lots of fun. Now, the next segment is about Grover Norquist, and it turns out that Republicans seem like they're being a little reasonable when it comes to taxes. In fact, some of them are willing to break his anti-tax pledge. But is Grover Norquist playing the bad guy so the Republicans look like the good guy? I don't know. Let's take a look at this video.
When you're $16 trillion in debt, the only pledge we should be making to each other is to avoid becoming Greece.
A pledge you signed 20 years ago, 18 years ago, is for that Congress. And I'm just saying we should not be taking ironclad positions.
You know, that pledge I signed 20 years ago was valid then. It's valid now, but times have changed significantly, and I care more about this country than I do about a 20-year-old pledge.
First of all, I agree entirely with Saxby Chambliss. A pledge you signed 20 years ago, 18 years ago, is for that Congress. For instance, if I were in Congress in 1941, I would have signed a supported declaration of war against Japan. I'm not going to attack Japan today.
I love being a senator, and I want to be a senator that matters for the state of South Carolina and the country. When you're $16 trillion in debt, the only pledge we should be making to each other is to avoid becoming Greece, and Republicans should put revenue on the table. I agree with Grover, we shouldn't raise rates, but I think Grover is wrong when it comes to we can't cap deductions and buy down debt. I will violate the pledge, long story short, for the good of the country, only if Democrats will do entitlement reform.
All right, I love that last comment. I agree with Grover, we can't raise rates. So you guys got to pay close attention to that. But before we get to that, Alexis, you get the first question, understandably so, because I want to know what you think. I want to pick your brain a little bit. Is Grover Norquist playing the bad guy so the Republicans can seem like the reasonable good guys in this scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I look at that clip, it's just such bullshit. Like, Grover has not held any sort of elected position. And I'm sorry, it's a pledge, it's not a law, but where has this Congress been? Democrats and Republicans, you know, and I just really think it's hypocritical because over the Bush administration, there was this huge spending orgy, and you know, we had the war, we had Medicare Part D, we've seen that spending skyrocket, and you know, now it's, well, you know, well, Grover's just such this huge villain, but you know, I'm putting my country, you know, ahead of me, and you know, I'm going to do what's right. Well, that's because we got our asses kicked in this election. And you know, I do believe that we shouldn't raise taxes. I philosophically, you know, there's only so many times you can go back to that well without any sort of, you know, I think there needs to be a lot of spending cuts.
So do you think the corporate tax rate right now is too high?
I think it's too high. I think a lot of people don't realize the taxes on dividends and capital savings, which I know that's a rich people problem, but a lot of people do have their 401ks. Rob's giving me looks, but
Alexis,
but no, I think Grover's a convenient scapegoat for a Congress that has sat on their hands and has not done anything whatsoever. They've kicked the can down the road. Senate hasn't passed a budget in over 3 years. I think it's just. I think it's a bunch of crap.
Well, I agree it's a bunch of crap, but probably for different reasons. I mean, I think that Republican obstruction has been one of the reasons why we haven't been able to pass a budget, at least a budget that makes sense. And, you know, when it comes to the corporate tax rate, we pay the lowest corporate tax rate of any industrialized country. It's a little ridiculous that now we're having this discussion about, oh, maybe we should raise taxes somehow. But they're not planning on raising taxes on the wealthy. I think that's the important thing that we should take away from this story. And that is where the mainstream media has failed, because they're all over the Republicans, making it seem like they're being reasonable, but in reality, they want to raise taxes on the middle class. Now, Lucas, I want you to jump in here and explain to the audience how they're planning on doing that.
Well, I think basically Grover Norquist is the sort of idea that Grover Norquist has embodied, which is to force the government to get smaller, is still the plan. Grover Norquist has been a useful tool in getting that done. But the fact of the matter is right now he's standing in the way of a really good deal for them. And so I think basically because what is being offered potentially on the table right now is cuts to major, people call them entitlement programs. They should really be called earned benefit programs because people pay into them their whole lives and they have earned the benefits that they get out. But Democrats are willing to put huge concessions on the table that they have never put on the table in the entire post-war period. And basically Grover Norquist embodies this kind of, this thing that has worked out really well, which is to always reduce tax rates because then inevitably you're going to have to cut spending to meet with that. We haven't done that yet, and now we're basically hitting the wall. And you know, the Republicans are not, yes, they're turning on Grover Norquist, but only in service of the exact same thing that he has been sort of pushing for the entire time.
And I think he's aware of that as well, because when he's interviewed about it, he's just like, yeah, no one's really crossing me, you know, to paraphrase what he said.
What I find amazing about all of this is it's almost as if history never existed. We can't look into the past and actually measure how we did when we had certain tax rates versus how we've done when we haven't. But in fact, we can, and history is quite clear, and I'm sorry to say, Alexis, to your point, we've done much better as a country and had much more success, especially for the middle class, when we've had higher top marginal tax rates. And that's not some crazy random thing to say. There's just a million graphs you can look at. Any sane, rational person will know that this is true. The Clinton boom happened when we had a higher marginal tax rate. The 50s and 60s, our top marginal tax rate was 90%. We did fine. Rich people just didn't get to live so fancy, but they still live fancy. Things were still good. You still had a good life. You just couldn't have the crazy good life. We've basically decided as a country, and particularly Republicans, unfortunately, I wish that this weren't true, but it is more Republicans, although not exclusively so, have decided that the thing to do is to, on the backs of the middle class, make sure that rich people can live a fabulous life. And rich people, in turn, as in any kleptocracy, which is what we've become essentially, make sure that their politicians who they have in their pocket are going to keep things that way. And you know, this fix the debt nonsense, this horrible asshole rich CEOs, the absolute worst of the worst, people who benefited hugely from the taxpayer saving essentially the economy in 2008 when mostly it was people like them who ruined the economy, now coming to us and saying, look, we can't raise taxes on rich people, for sure. That's off the table. That would be crazy. However, we're going to have to cut entitlements for middle class people because that's how we can save it. Pensions. My pension as a person who makes $40 million a year if I run Honeywell say, listen, my pension's great. It's going to be totally protected, but all the workers, I've underpaid $50 billion into their fund. But don't touch my pension. You're going to have to deal with their pensions because they're the problem. Anybody who can't see through what that is, which is class warfare from the rich against the middle class, is just crazy. And one last point on Lindsey Graham, and it's sad that we have such dumb people in our government. Greece doesn't have its own currency. So we are nothing like Greece. We have a Fed that can print more money when we need it. Greece doesn't because they're part of the euro. They have to go to Germany and look at Angela Merkel and not shudder and get something out of her, and they're not going to. So they're screwed. There's nothing Greece can do. Their fate is out of their hands. Our fate is in our hands. And to hear a sitting senator who in theory has to have some sort of actual input into economics say something like that is just depressing.
So they're definitely saying that they are willing to make increases in taxes if Democrats are willing to concede when it comes to some entitlement spending. But
we're willing to increase revenue, but
right.
not, particularly not tax rates.
Right.
And that's the key. And as a percentage of GDP, we're collecting less taxes now than we have in the entire post-war period. And basically, for the last 20 years or so, we've done what the Republicans want, which is cut tax rates, but we've continued paying for all of the same things because we live in a civilized society. People want roads and infrastructure, so it's unacceptable to stop paying for those things. So instead we've just borrowed the money and they've run us into this wall where basically we need to stop borrowing so much money to pay for the things that we want. And this is the plan. This is the long game, that you underfund the things so that then instead of trying to directly attack them as an item of spending, you go, well, look, now we're in a crisis and we have to reduce spending.
Right.
And that's basically where we're at right now.
So for every dollar of revenue that the Republicans agree to increase for this country, the Democrats are thinking about making $3 in cuts, right, for every dollar.
Sounds like the Democrats.
Sounds like the Democrats, which is probably the most infuriating part of the story. The reason why we reelected Obama is because we did not want cuts to our entitlements.
But you have to cut. You can look at the budget. We can get rid, and the one thing that really irritated me this whole election, let's get rid of NPR and Big Bird. You can get rid of every program and not touch entitlements. We're still going to be screwed.
Right. We can get rid of defense. I mean, we can cut defense spending. That's one thing.
There is stuff there that can be cut, but we have to tackle entitlement reform. That's going to.
There are charts that will show you that if we just get rid of the Bush tax cuts, we essentially will almost solve this problem entirely. It's just nonsense. I'm sorry, like.
And there's charts that say you can do that.
But yes, they come from the Heritage Foundation. You have to look at people's predictive value. If you look at a group, if you look at somebody like Heritage or AEI or these places, and you say they said this in 1980 and it didn't come true. They said this in 1985, it didn't come true. This in 1990. At a certain point, you have to say, you know what? I don't need to listen to them. I need to listen to people whose predictions tend to come true. And as an example of all this, Nate Silver. I'm done. That's it, okay? People had opinions about him. His predictive value was clear from 2008, and yet people pretended it wasn't, and they listened to the nonsense of Rasmussen and others. This is true across the board in our society. There are people who are quite clear and have been in the past about their track record, about their predictive value of what they've said about the economy, and they have been right, and none of them are supply-siders. Arthur Laffer has never been right about anything. Not a single thing he's done or promulgated has worked. And that is true across the board with economics. Keynesianism has worked throughout history. You can look at it up until 1937. Would you say it's
worked in California? Because I keep seeing our tax rates go up here.
States are not the federal government. It's different. We can't print money. It's not a apples to apples comparison. When you talk about a federal government, it has the ability to print money. Keynesianism only works when you can or can't print money. So it doesn't have any. It's not germane to federal or to state.
We've had about 4 rounds of quantitative easing, and it's not.
Yeah, what we need to do is we need to raise tax again, like we have in the past, to get back to where we were in the past, where we had either a balanced budget or a very small percentage of GDP as debt, which we did under Clinton, which we did under Kennedy, which we did under Eisenhower. we've done this. It's worked. We actually know what works and we know what doesn't work. What didn't work is what Reagan did in 1981. It destroyed the economy. And it's continued to up until now.
And what we need the government to do is, and it's a dirty word, redistribution. We absolutely do, because without it, capital concentrates in smaller and smaller groups of people. And again, as far as having a well-functioning economy, you have to have broadly shared prosperity. And it's been clear that the private sector will not do that on its own. They will not raise wages commensurate with increases in profits.
I mean,
so the government
we see what's
has
happening
to have
abroad.
that role.
I mean, we just did an entire segment on that. You see what I'm saying? I mean, when there is a profit motive and you have an amoral corporation, they're going to do whatever they can to squeeze as much money as they can through their business. And they're not going to care about workers' rights. They're not going to care about paying fair wages. I mean, look at Walmart and the way Walmart treats their workers. I mean, Walmart is the largest recipient of federal dollars of any other company because of the fact that they have to subsidize their employers. They have to pay for their health insurance. They have to pay them food stamps because Walmart isn't paying them a living wage that they can survive on, even though they're working full-time jobs. But I want to make one thing very clear in this segment. I don't think we've made it clear enough. How exactly are the Republicans planning on raising revenue?
Oh, this is interesting because we've seen the home mortgage deduction being tossed out there, which that would be great for the middle class. Not really, but no, they want to close certain loopholes and deductions, which again I don't think that's going to be enough.
All right.
Well, they basically just don't want to raise taxes. They're trying to make it seem as though they're in favor of being reasonable, but they're not really they're not offering anything new. And I think to Robert's point a little bit on Art Laffer and the Heritage Foundation, the problem is half of this argument is a disingenuous argument. And you look at someone like Art Laffer, like a Milton Friedman even, or an Ayn Rand. The reason these people are prominent people even still today is not because their ideas made sense, but because their ideas serviced a class of society that benefits from that type of thinking.
Useful idiots.
Exactly, and if you, and you provide what seems to be an ideological underpinning to a worldview that basically says, dump the privileges on the people that are already privileged, don't ask them to pay more or to be, an essential part of this economic system, and everything will be better for everyone. We have no evidence of it, but just keep doing it, and it'll work out fine. And basically that's what has gotten us to right now. I mean, the idea at all that somehow we should be lowering tax rates anywhere when we just had a decade of very low tax rates and basically stagnant growth. The only growth came from government spending, ironically, because of all of the explosion of Homeland Security, all of this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just there is no facts to back it up, so it is all just kind of, you have to take it on faith.
All right, Lucas, I'm going to let you have the last word on that. This is like second segment in a row you get the last word, right?
I think Robert had
Oh, did you?
Usually
Sorry.
I do.
All right, we got to take one more break, and when we come back, I'd like to say that we're going to do a lighter story, but it's not very light. It has to do with domestic violence and the clown that is Chris Brown. We'll be back. Welcome back to The Point. Our final point has to do with domestic violence and this whole situation with Chris Brown and comedian Jenny Johnson. Everyone's been talking about it. He said some pretty vile things to her on Twitter. In fact, I want to read you how that whole interaction went down. Turns out that Chris Brown had tweeted a photo of himself, and as a caption for the photo, he wrote, "I look old as fuck, I'm only 23. Well, Jenny Johnson saw that and said, "I know, being a worthless piece of shit can really age a person." Chris Brown responded to that, writing, "Take them teeth out when you're sucking my dick, ho." And he spelled ho, H-O-E. Jenny Johnson said, "It's H-O, not H-O-E, you ignorant fuck." And it goes on and on and on. I think the worst part was when he said, "I should fart while you're giving me top, seize the day." And she said, "Your mom must be proud. See, I don't have to tell you what you already know, ho." He says, "Mom
really
says
vivid.
hello. She told me not to shart in your mouth, wanted me to shit right on the retina." So, What do you guys think about this? I mean,
He's
Chris
creative.
Brown, I think if I sat down and really tried to come up with something as vulgar as possible, I couldn't get as vulgar as sharding in someone's retina. But Lucas, you get the first question on this one. Okay. As someone who made national headlines, actually global headlines, for beating up his girlfriend Rihanna in 2009, what are your thoughts on him, making this public spectacle of himself again, saying something, pretty abusive to another woman? Yeah,
well, and also, I mean, it's not like he hit, sort of smacked her or something. He pretty savagely beat her.
I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah, I think that this basically speaks to kind of what I see as the sole ascendant value in our culture, which is money, and that basically you can kind of get away with anything because ultimately Chris Brown still sells albums. He still makes money for the people who employ him, and he still has a lot of fans that really like his music. So ultimately, that obviously trumps any of the bad shit that he's done.
But that's incredible to me because I mean it's amazing how much celebrities get away with, right? Because it's not just the fact that people are willing to brush it under the rug. It's like, oh, be cool, that didn't happen, just forget about it.
People are celebrating
They're celebrating it. I mean, there were a few tweets. I remember this amazing article I read about women who were tweeting to Chris Brown saying things like, I'll let you beat me up any day, you so fine. Like, really? Is that acceptable?
I think it's a question about money. I think it's just a question of stupidity
right.
in this country now.
Right.
Well, certainly for the fans, but as far as the people that keep him as a prominent figure, the people who keep employing him to make records and all, those people are not doing it because well, maybe some of them think he's hot or like his music, but ultimately they're doing it because he makes them money, and that fundamentally is worth more to them than condemning a person who beats women. So I guess that's what it is.
I know you're dying to jump in on this topic. What's going on?
Yeah, it makes me so happy. I want to take it back a little bit to something that you and I were just talking about, but there's an issue when you get into these sort of things of where's the relative power of the person who's doing the speaking, and to whom are they speaking, and what are the general sort of societal positions for those different groups of people. In the case of Chris Brown, you have what? You have a successful artist, he's African American, he's young, and he's a male. In the case of Jenny Johnson, you have a woman who's actually provoking him, but then is being spoken to in a way that men have spoken to women for a long time, and is sort of tapping into certain stereotypes and archetypes that are out there. And it reminds me very much of the Daniel Tosh rape joke incident. And there's sort of a brilliant piece that Lindsay Beierstein wrote on Feministing about how to tell a rape joke. And basically what she said is there are times where you can tell a rape joke and it's funny. And it's not just that you're a woman. You can be a man and tell a rape joke if you recognize your own relative power in the history of rape and how rape generally works. That generally it's been powerful men raping women, and if you're taking that position, it's not going to be funny, it's going to be nasty, which is what Daniel Tosh did in her mind. But Louis C.K. tells a brilliant rape joke which understands, recognizes all that, and still manages to be funny while also being a joke about rape. I think in the case of Chris Brown, he's just so unself-aware. To Lucas's point, I completely agree. I think the reason he's so unself-aware is because he doesn't have to be. And there's no reason for him to be when he continues to be employed and he continues to make tons of money. He doesn't have to be self-aware. He can still talk however the fuck he wants, because we know that one of the things he managed to get away with was beating the shit out of a woman in public so that people could see it. And he still sold lots of records afterwards. So why should he change? Why shouldn't he shart on the retina of Jenny Johnson, metaphorically? I don't know what that would look like literally.
I don't want to think about that.
Horrible thought.
Yeah.
There's no reason for him not to right now.
Well, yeah. And he is 23, so I think that's maybe, like we see with child stars and all. I mean, so I don't know what age he was when he first became
21.
No, he became a star at like 15, right, or 16.
Well, so that'll factor in too. That
for sure.
I mean, if basically, because it seems in my sort of limited experience, it seems like once you become a celebrity, it's very hard to find people that will tell you what you're doing is not okay.
That's right. You're almost
exactly. You live in a bubble of constant positive reinforcement that whatever you're doing is awesome and it's great and you're an awesome person. So he may be to some degree a victim of that too. Basically, what.
That's dead right. Not hearing no is a really difficult thing for any personality to handle. And the younger you stop hearing no, you see our athletes who get identified by Nike at age like 12 as being a great athlete. And then people stop saying no to them, and they basically get whatever they want up until they run into the wall of the reality of how good an athlete they are.
Yeah.
Or the same thing with artists, and it's not healthy. It doesn't do anybody any favors, I don't think.
I've been around some of those athletes when they hit the wall, and it's very sad.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
Alexis, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about your thoughts on Rihanna, because Rihanna is getting a little bit of backlash because after this whole Twitter war went down, after the tweets made their, or the twits made their tweets, I couldn't help myself. Rihanna had tweeted a photo of Chris Brown laying on her bed without a shirt on. And people were just, you know, of course there are two camps. There are the women who love Chris Brown. They think she's a dirty hoe for still being with him for that reason. And then there are the women who are like, well, you're a role model. You should really not be with this guy because you're sending the wrong message. If he abused you in the way that he did very publicly and he didn't suffer any consequences for it, well, it's kind of your responsibility to at least stop communication with him. But they did a duet. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, they did a duet, which I'm sorry to say it's kind of good. I didn't buy it though. But no, yeah, this whole question with Rihanna, because she had this very, very intimate interview with Oprah, kind of saying how she's forgiven him, and you know, it's been rumored that they've been kind of off and on, and you know, as a woman, it's kind of disappointing to see that behavior because you're right, Rihanna, she's so successful. I think she's probably on track to have more #1 singles than the Beatles, and to see that she thinks that she has to be in a relationship like that, but it's also, you know, her business too, and you know, she's been very you know, vocal, especially in some of her latest songs about, you know, I never asked to be a role model and mind your own business, which I can respect that. But yeah, it is a little bit troubling to kind of see that play out. I think the sad thing is I think it's a reality for a lot of women in this country. It's just we're seeing it with Rihanna because of who she is and how famous she is.
That's right. My mother ran a battered women's center when I was a kid for many years in Vermont, so a very rural area. And the main story she would bring back to me all the time was this horrible thing that some man would do to a woman and that the woman would always go back.
Yep.
And that's like the thing I see with this that just seems like familiar behavior that goes well beyond whether the person's a celebrity, and it's just the bigger issue problem is I think a lot of women feel like they, to Alexis' point, they don't have somewhere else to go. They can't say no anymore. They're forced for whatever reason to continue to be a part of, you know, behavior that's destructive.
Yeah, and I think that the other factor is, of course, a lot of women who have been abused convince themselves that it was done as an act of love. You know, they somehow rationalize it in their minds, and I don't know if that's what's happening with Rihanna, but you know, obviously she's not forced to be with him for financial reasons. So it's kind of interesting to see someone of her caliber going back to someone like Chris Brown. But, you know, let's go back to the whole role model thing, because I'm always fascinated by that. Now, I feel like when you sign up for a certain job, for instance, if I am a host for a YouTube show, part of my job description is you will have to deal with trolls. People are going to say hideous things about you online, and that's part of the job description. Sorry. But as public figures, as celebrities, do you feel that it's part of their job description to be a role model? Do you think it's unfair to ask them to be a role model, or is that just something that should be expected of them? Robert?
No, I don't think that's part of the job. I don't think it's, you know, Rihanna's she's just a young woman. That's all she is. She's a famous young woman, but she's just a young woman. And like I said, I think the connection between 22-year-old in Vermont who goes back and Rihanna is clear. It's not anything to do with her fame or her lack of fame. It's because there's a system and there's a setup in our society where, you know, the relationship between men and women is what it is, and that's something that happens to women. And so, I mean, it'd be nice, it would be wonderful if Rihanna could become a spokesperson for domestic abuse or whatever, but you can't expect that she's going to be. She doesn't have to be that smart to be a great singer. She doesn't have to be that interested to be a great singer. She doesn't have to be that articulate. It's not, none of that is necessary. She might be, and if she is, wonderful, but if she isn't, you can't blame her for it.
Well, that's a great point. I haven't heard that perspective. I like that.
Lucas? Yeah, well, and you know, I mean, she can be an example and not a role model too. I mean, you can point to her and say, look, this is what an abusive relationship looks like. This is what you know, to your child, this is what you never want to be in. And yeah, parents should be role models, not you know, these celebrities that have all kinds of images and everything. It's just, it feels like such an easy default thing to just get mad at celebrities when they don't sort of fit this perfect idea, because ultimately everyone is human and we all do things that aren't amazing sometimes. And you know, it feels like the standard of what we decide a role model is when they're a famous person is just, it's like politics, where it's just these unbelievably unrealistic expectations for people that they will inevitably disappoint us on. But it's our fault for having that expectation in the first place, because, you know, they are real people and they do have flaws. And again, it's like, look, you're the one raising your kids. So if they, you know, if they don't have any good role models, that's more your fault that you're not being one than some celebrity who has no connection to you except that maybe you bought their album.
Can I undercut my own point, though?
Sure.
Now that I think about it more,
okay.
Get into an argument with myself, which I'm capable of doing. You know, the Chris Brown fans who went after Jenny Johnson went after Chris Brown. So her expectation had to be that he was going to get back at her, and then she played very well with him, and I think their exchange was a sort of reasonable exchange of equals in a way, particularly since it was done virtually. Chris Brown's fans, the things they said to her, all of which of course came from an incredibly sexist place. Immediately the first place that Chris Brown's fans go, unsurprisingly, is sexism, and really vile sexism. That is indicative of this bigger issue. More than anything else, the first thing people think is, oh, it's a woman, so therefore my insults are going to be, you know, hoe, or, you know, about fucking her, or about all these things that are genuinely male-female oriented. That stuff is ugly, and honestly, I would give Rihanna much more of a pass than I give Chris Brown, who I think is pretty just awful, just like an awful guy.
Well, and he's clearly attracted fans like that as well, through his own personality.
Yeah.
Which is like a negative role model. In a way.
And Jenny Johnson did get, you know, a fair share of death threats, so much so that she was asking, you know, Twitter to look into it. And of course, I feel like that is something that you expect on the internet. As soon as you say something people disagree with, you're going to get the death threats. I'm not saying that it's justifiable. I'm saying that that's just part of the game. But Alexis, I want the final question to go to you. Do you think that the way society, our justice system handled the whole Chris Brown situation says anything about the way we deal with domestic violence here in the United States?
I think it was unfortunate, you know, when that whole incident happened. Just the need for us to consume that information, so much so where, you know, those pictures got leaked. They were terrible. But yeah, I don't think it's domestic violence so much. It's so much this, you know, we're feeding into this celebrity culture, and we want to see people rise up and we want to see them fall. And I think the great thing about Chris Brown, you know, I think why he even still had some fans was because, you know, we want to see this come back and see him redeem himself, which he obviously hasn't. But I think it just speaks to the larger issue of like what Lucas was talking about, like having people there to talk to their kids and say, hey, this is an example of, you know, this is why you should not be putting these people on a pedestal. And it's unfortunate, and, you know, it's, you know, no one likes an ungrateful celebrity either, but yeah, it's a very difficult situation. But I think, you know, when it becomes too much for me, I turn it off and I walk away. And as, you know, we've been talking about consumerism, I think, you know, if you don't like Chris Brown, don't buy his music, and hopefully he will eventually go away and be horrible.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely. Well, I want to hear what you guys have to say about this issue, so please leave your comments at the bottom of this video. We'd love to hear your feedback, and we will take one more quick break and come back. Welcome back to The Point. I wanted to thank our panelists for being here and having this great discussion. Robert Green, tell me a little more about yourself. I know you have a friend who's working on sweaters or something.
Yeah, that's it. You pretty much nailed it there. It's mostly sweaters. No, I just wanted to plug, because of the first segment we talked about you know, garments and such. My friend Adriana Herrera has a website called Fashioning Change. FashioningChange.com, and what they do is, if you click that you want to buy like a white Gap t-shirt, it'll show you the equivalent ethically made t-shirt, and it gives you the whole story of why it's ethical and why the Gap t-shirt isn't ethical, and it will do it for basically every product there is, and you can shop directly on the site, and it's a pretty amazing piece, and I think she's done a great job. It's their first year. They've been in business. I think they just were in a year today. Actually.
Excellent. Robert Green, thank you so much for joining us. Lucas Lilieholm, otherwise known as the Lorax, works for Current TV, does the Young Turks on Current TV.
An upstart show. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. Just about to cross the year threshold on being on Current TV. So.
Are we going to get wasted to celebrate? You can talk
would
about
we
that.
Not?
All right, and then last but certainly not least, Alexis Garcia from PJTV. Tell us a little more about what you're working on.
Well, we're picking up the pieces, I guess, after the election. No, it's great. We're just keeping at it at pjtv.com. You can harass me on Twitter as well. I can't promise to shart in your mouth, though.
All right, great closer. Well, I'm Anna Kasparian. You guys can watch me every day on the Young Turks. Go to youtube.com/TYT Live Monday through Friday, and also on Current TV Monday through Friday. And of course, a special thank you to our Point contributor, Judy Gearhart. To find out more about International Labor Rights Forum, go to laborrights.org. We'll see you guys next week.